community, the peer mentorship program in the Department of Chemistry. I, in collaboration with, oh, the mic is on.
We're ready to go.
I noticed myself. I, in collaboration with Lauren, who's our GPS STEM program coordinator, we're trying to bring back Life Beyond PhD series, starting with Rachel, who's our guest speaker today. I hope you guys have a great time. After the slides, I'll be up here to just kind of like click on people, unless you would like to.
Either way,
questions.
yeah.
Okay, I'll try to mediate a bit. But thank you. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Lauren, for wonderful, every logistic company. Do I need to be close to that microphone or?
No, you're good there.
I'm good,
But
okay.
if you have questions back here, you might have to repeat.
Okay,
I don't think I've like the first two of us.
if you ask questions, you have to speak out loud. Okay, awesome. Yes, so Life Beyond PhD, I love the title of this series. Back in the day when I was doing a PhD, I was kind of doing the same thing that Catherine is doing. Organizing a lot of events for peer mentoring and also for career development, because I was having like that question, what could I do beyond my PhD? So it's like almost 5 years now since I graduated 2019. I'm very excited to share kind of so far, I'm still at the very beginning of my career. I'm sure that a lot of things will happen down the road, but like my title was my career in the healthcare industry, navigating space between life sciences and business. But I don't know whether any of you are a fan of Stephen Colbert's late night show. And he has a segment that's called First Draft, where he, shows holiday cards like in the beautiful last draft, and he shows like the first draft. It's a comedy show, but it doesn't work.
Oh no. I can also stand it if you want to cue it to me.
Okay,
I can just
so-
flip between things.
Go.
Oh.
There we go. That's my first draft. Which is like the PhD didn't go as planned because it didn't have plan. So like you said, you're very confused. That's totally fine, because at least I was very confused and I think I turned out okay. So, there's hope. But I have to say, there wasn't a plan, but there was definitely a direction, and I can kind of share with you how I kind of got here. So we have an hour. I think my plan is to just tell you my story. I know you all have a lot of questions. I got a list of questions, and I'll leave a lot of time for questions, hopefully half an hour. But I'll just share a little bit, and hopefully that also answers some of your questions just with me telling my story. So let's go. So I will focus on my PhD and beyond, but I figure I would start from the very beginning, just to show you, my entire life as a person, I guess. So I was born and raised in this very, very famous city called Wuhan, China, which was not famous at all so before the pandemic. So I kept telling people that I benefited the most out of the pandemic because before, people would ask where, I was like, well, you would know it's a 10 million people city, but it's not international, nobody knows, but now everyone does. So I was born and raised there, did all the way to high school. I was very interested in natural sciences. Started loving astronomy, but very quickly switched to biology. My mom told me astronomy is very lonely. And then that was it. For I loved my life. I still love biology, just generally very curious about like how life works. So it was very natural that I went on to do my undergrad in biology. In you can go to the next one. In Hong Kong, when what major to study is an agonizing choice for most people. And if you are like from China or familiar with the Gaokao system, like choosing your major is like such a painful process. It wasn't for me. So I just decided, or it wasn't even a decision. The decision was really where to go. I could have gone through the I guess, normal process, go to school in China, and I could have gone to some pretty good programs, or actually under the influence of my parents, decided to actually go to Hong Kong and kind of experience a slightly different system. To be completely honest, academically, the school that I went to wasn't the strongest, and I don't think I actually learned a whole lot academically in undergrad, but I actually think that's fine. Because the point of undergrad, it's more about growing up and becoming an independent person and having your own point of view, because you're no longer your parents' kid. So yeah, I went to Hong Kong, studied biology. Actually, it was environmental science. We actually learned a lot about like wastewater treatment and that kind of stuff. It was kind of fun, but I think that actually focused my mind and really into the research side, and especially neuroscience, even though we didn't have a lot of opportunities for research there. It's a small school. But I think just through the undergrad, focused me more. And then it was never a doubt for me to do a PhD. It was really just a matter of when and where, I guess. Did 1 year of exchange in the US. Again, not the best school, right? But was the best year of my life in undergrad. Love the culture, like college culture in the US. I think it suited me much better. There I was talking to somebody just now that I'm not a city girl, so living in Hong Kong was kind of painful. Too many people, very stressful, very noisy, and very expensive. And there's some, political situations between mainland and Hong Kong that some of you are knowing, you understand. It's sort of all of a sudden from being a very sheltered child in China, very naive, to facing the real world. I think that really taught me a lot, actually benefited a lot later in life, kind of being able to live in a world where you are not the main. I don't even know how to, you don't own the place, and you have to find your way, and you have to do well, and you have to do probably even better than others in order for you to survive. But in my whole time in my undergrad, my goal was to leave Hong Kong, to do a PhD, which I unfortunately didn't achieve for the first try. So I didn't get into any program basically, and I had to stay and basically do a gap year that's not by choice, and ended up finding a job in a research lab. That was really the beginning of my research career, I would say, before my actual PhD, because research assistant doing this project in a lab, this neuroscience project in a lab that's not focused on neuroscience. I had a lot of independence, but then I think, again, I don't think I learned a lot academically, but I learned two very important things. One is that the PI at the time, he's actually a Chinese medicine physician, and he's very renowned. So he has a big lab that does Western, molecular biology and medicine research. That's not Chinese medicine. But then at the same time, he is very, very well connected, both in the medical world and also in the research world. And he's very good at making the connections, showcasing other people's work, and also then showcasing his own work. And because of that, he's extremely successful, even though I don't actually think he understands everything that's going on in his research lab, to be completely honest. But he is extremely well-resourced because of that. So I think and comparing to other labs, some people are maybe more focused on their research, but struggle with resource. And ultimately, if you don't have research, you don't do anything, right? So I learned that the part of, it's not just communication, it's really how do you almost like sell yourself. And this sounds like a really bad word, and I felt that way. But that's not necessarily a very bad word. And I saw how well he did, and still maintaining being a very good scholar and really a gentleman kind of scholar that I really well respected. So that's the first thing that I learned. The second thing was I at the end of that research year, we actually went to another school and did a very small scale seminar, and I was the only person without a graduate degree giving a talk, and it was like a 2-day seminar, really giving talks. And somehow my talk was really praised by one of the big professors there, because he was really happy with how I told the story. Instead of just the data was not, so super advanced. I was an undergrad research assistant. But I was able to put it together in a story, and I made some fancy slides and animation. It wasn't the super academic dry kind of way, and that really captured everybody's attention. And I felt so good about myself, So I was like, oh yeah, I'm so ready. I'm going into PhD. So on my second try, I finally got to Purdue. And that's where I did my 5 years of PhD in neurophysiology. And with that year of research experience, I felt really ready. I came here, did the rotation. The first year it was so great because there's far fewer people, way more space. I loved it. And then, the cost of living is like super low compared to Hong Kong. It's just so much more relaxed. And I was able to focus on, the subject that I love the most, neuroscience, and I wrote it in various different labs. Those neuroscience in different perspectives, like from different angles. Really loved it. But from maybe the second year when I settled in my permanent lab and started, doing my PhD research, deciding which direction I wanted to go, I was also watching my advisor, who actually joined Purdue the same time that I did. So like the first year, he joined in August, same as me. I started rotation. He started building the lab. So I actually intentionally put his rotation the last, so that like there's like at least a lab there. So I was, watching him. I was his second student. The first student was only a half year ahead of me. We basically then finished building the lab, all the equipment, the physical side of building the lab, as well as the soft side, writing grants, so many grants, and big ones, small ones, recruiting students, training students, recruiting undergrads, and trying to get into any kind of programs on campus to raise your profile and so that people know who you are, stuff like that. It was good. It was really good as a student to get that kind of training, but it was painful to watch him going through that, so much stress. And I would say he's one of the more typical kind of super overstressed, assistant professor. So he wasn't, the most supportive of his students. And I don't necessarily blame him. I mean, it's kind of bad because that's kind of the norm, but also I kind of understand why, right? Because he's in that kind of situation, and so much of his career depends on the output of his students, and you don't really know how the student's going to turn out. So that's what like Catherine and I was talking about. Did I enjoy it? My PhD, I really did. But then not everything's perfect, and there are definitely situations, requests and stuff like that's not ideal. So I started thinking, okay, what do I want to do? Actually coming into, or even before that, I have to say that, I'm open-minded wanting to do a PhD. I could do a postdoc, I could go into academia or not. I am just wherever there's good opportunity. I say that sincerely, but also very confused and with no real idea. Because I honestly have no idea what you can do. Both my parents are actually university professors, and growing up on university campus, that was my life. So I'm very sheltered, very sort of naive from that perspective. So at that time, I was looking at PI, I'm like, I may not want this life. So what can I do? And I started exploring, and it wasn't that easy either. I guess being in Indiana, it's cost of living is low because it's far away from anything, any big city and industry and everything, right? So there's not a lot of exposure. So this is really great that you have this resource and you actually have a person appointed to specifically do this. That's great that we did not have. I think that was also years ago, and also it's, you know, Indiana, not California. So no offense, I love Purdue. So I had to do it by myself. So what I did was I did become president for our graduate student organization, and then I did a whole series of events as graduate student organization. So that's so I was doing this, right? I was inviting anybody that I could like invite to give a talk. Anybody who had a PhD degree but is not a professor, was not a professor at the time that I could get hold of, I invited them for a talk. So all kinds. And I was still very confused, you know, it's just like, yeah, they all sound great, but it doesn't seem very, right? I didn't know where to start, but at least I got my thinking started. And then really towards the end of my PhD, life happens. So not everything is planned. I actually got married. My husband was actually assistant professor who at the time, and then who was very disillusioned of academia. So he went all the way, you know, become assistant professor, decided that that's really not what he wanted to do. It was really not what he imagined it would be. So I would like to think partially because my influence about industry, he actually got an industry job at Amgen. So he moved here, I tried my best to graduate, and then I moved here too. So, you know, I didn't have the time. I really just have to rush to graduate. Didn't have the time to look for a job. Also didn't know where to look for a job. Well, I didn't know where to start. I knew it has to be somewhere in Southern California. So I really came here, started talking to people, and talking to people at Amgen. Applied to so many jobs at Amgen because that would make sense because we lived there already. Got nothing, and people. And I applied for so many roles, and I don't even know what those roles are. Probably some of them are very inappropriate at the level and everything. But I got to talk to some people. I did talk to research R&D, didn't actually want to stay in the lab. I did somebody in commercial data analytics, which is the first department. Oh, I think you can go to the last bubble. No, this one before, yes. The consulting one, yeah. I talked to somebody at Amgen, commercial data analytics, and he's like, yeah, you seem pretty good, but with just a PhD with no industry experience, like big pharma's not gonna take that chance and hire you into a commercial kind of role. Like R&D is a different story. So he introduced me to CS Associate, which first time I've heard about it. I did look into consulting very briefly when I was doing my PhD. Didn't get anywhere, but I mean, I wasn't like single-mindedly looking for it, but then I was like, that's great. I talked to people there, and then I really quickly prepared for it. It took me a week, because I only had a week. Read the book that's called Case in Point. If any of you was preparing for a case interview for kind of consulting style, then you would know that book. You definitely read that book. But anyways, Case in Point, they have many editions, just find the newest one. It just tells you what case interview is, because that's what consulting firms do. That's how they interview people. And I just went, and then luckily, somehow they saw something in me and I got a job. So I went into consulting without knowing anything about what consulting is. Basically like that. And I think somebody asked the question, can you jump straight from PhD to consulting? Well, evidently, yes, because that's what I did. And a lot of people actually did that. So then I actually realized that a lot of consulting firms, especially managed consulting in the life sciences, healthcare, medical, field for this industry, they will hire PhDs straight, and then they will hire you into just generalist, strategy consultant, with nothing to do with your major. So they really they don't care what your research is. It's really a matter of your critical thinking. Can you learn stuff very quickly? So another question was, what kind of skills prepare you from PhD to consulting? I guess my current life, I think it's all of that, right? The so-called soft skills. Can you learn something really, really quickly? Can you communicate things very clearly, succinctly? Can you think about things critically and also creatively? It's all about that, and then working on the stress, the tenacity of struggling through, all of that kind of stuff. And a great deal of it comes out of the case interview, which I actually think is a pretty good format of interviews. Interviews are notoriously bad at judging how good a candidate is, but this interview generally is slightly better. But a lot of it also comes through just natural attrition, to be honest. Because consulting, a lot of people, I think, ask, what is it like? It's a very high-paced, high-stress kind of environment. And you kind of have to, because that's just how it is like. And if you can't deal with it, you quit. And the attrition rate is very high, but that's kind of a natural thing. It's a kind of a way to also, I guess, screen people. And at the time, I think right now, unfortunately, the job market is not great for this kind of consulting. So I think it's a lot harder because, it went through the pandemic, it went through a low in hiring, and then all of a sudden they realized it's a lot of work. So they hired a lot of people, and then all the big pharma cut funding, cut budget. So then they lost the business. So now there's again a very low hiring. It's a lot of the thing is also about the external environment when you graduate. It's kind of unfortunate. When I graduated, the market was pretty normal, I would say. So that's the general practice that they would just hire a lot of fresh grads, and then see who lasts, right? And then also, I didn't stay at CS for that long. I was only at CS for about less than 2 years, a little bit less than 2 years, which is pretty typical. Because there's usually people who do consulting as a stepping stone, which is most people, which is what I did. And there are people who really, really like that kind of lifestyle, thrive in that environment, then they will probably stay forever, almost. They might switch to other companies. But those are very, very few people who would do that. So I kind of did the very typical thing. I went in there, I kind of learned about how this whole pharmaceutical industry works from external standpoint, but by peeking into the client's organization and by working on these different projects. And at the time, the staffing model at DS was that in the LA office, because Amgen was a major client, so they have like a client team where you are aligned to this one client, but you would do all kinds of different projects. So you're a generalist in terms of the subject matter, but then you build deeper relationship with your client. So that's what I did. So every single project that I did throughout that year, those almost 2 years, was different, which was very difficult, because imagine that every 3 months, and usually you get staff on multiple projects at the same time. So you have to learn completely new things really quickly, and then at least pretend that you know something more than your client, and then you come up, because they're look for your expert advice, right? That's why they paid a lot of money to hire you as a consultant to do this, to answer this very difficult question. Because if it's not difficult, then they will answer it themselves. So you have to learn something really quickly and grab the key points and also understand clients' needs, and put them all together, and then come up with something. And then you have to go on to the next project, completely new, not just subject matter, but also types of research. So I did some primary market research, which would be collect information, firsthand, sort of surveys or interviews, but then there are also strategy projects with, there's some analytics with like sales, projects management, with marketing, like medical affairs like planning cycles and even a sales team training module at the very beginning of the pandemic when everybody's so very freaked out, and we did a training module on emotional intelligence for the field force to train them to relate to their doctors at the most difficult time. You know, I didn't know any of that, but like you have to build all that from scratch, which was really fun, very fulfilling, but not sustainable at all. So I kind of did what almost everybody did, was I jumped to the client side, which was Amgen, because at the time, you know, biggest client and most of the project was actually for Amgen. So very smooth transition. I would say that was much easier than so jumping from CS to Amgen was much smoother and easier than coming from PhD to consulting. Because coming from PhD to consulting, I really knew nothing. Good thing is the consulting firm usually don't expect you to know anything. They train you. So that's kind of the advantage of going through consulting. I call it basically going through almost like an MBA, but you get paid at the same time. so that was kind of a good deal. Coming to Amgen, I felt much more well prepared because at the time I already worked on the product that I was going to be working on. I already know most of the people on the team, and so I could hit the ground and run. And that's kind of what big pharma is looking for. So they are much less willing to hire someone who might have a lot of good potential, but don't know too much about the day-to-day practicality of the work, just because they don't have the time to do that. Usually when they hire, they need somebody to come in and hit the ground and run. So that's also part of the reason why coming straight out of PhD without any business experience, it will be really difficult to get straight into a non-R&D rollout. But you can see you don't need a whole lot of experience, 2 years of consulting is enough. And that's what I did first. I was in the department called Commercial Data Analytics. That's where I think Catherine and I made the connection, because we were recruiting for a career development program, which was specific to the department. Summer internship before you graduate PhD, and then return offer if it worked out for a 3-year rotation within the department. Because at the time there were actually quite a few of us, same kind of background, PhD, consulting, commercial data analytics at Amgen. All have this kind of passion of maybe we don't need consulting staff, maybe like for the people who maybe have done consulting club, maybe have done some internship, with a little bit of business acumen, we can train them in-house. So we built that program together. We reached out to a lot of students, try it out, and building this rotation program through different functions. Because within the commercial data analytics, we actually have several different functions, and it's a little bit, some people say it kind of like an internal consulting division. We don't like that term, but essentially you are the advisor who knows the data really well. So this whole department analyze all kinds of different data that's relevant for the company. So on the commercial side, so internal sales data, external data that you can buy, claims data, insurance, pharmacy data. And then also primary data, that's what I did, primary market research, which is, there are a lot of questions that the data doesn't exist, so you have to go and collect it yourself. So you did surveys, market research, interviews, ethnography, various different, novel techniques to gather those information. But ultimately the goal is to answer questions that advise business decisions. So we basically, the department didn't make any decision, we're not decision makers, but we work with various different commercial functions as well as sometimes medical and clinical development to advise them on, based on the data, this is perhaps the best way to go. So that's what we did. And we all obviously work with consulting firms directly. I did that for 2.5 years, and I supported a very high profile launch of a drug that's for severe asthma. It's called Tezspire. It was a collaboration with AstraZeneca, so two big companies. Again, a lot of stakeholder management, and you're started to realize that actually the value that you add in these kind of roles in industry is not necessarily the most basic technical skills. Because all the most basic, combing through data and including primary research, the interviews, these surveys, they're done by vendors. They're all outsourced because it's not economical to do it by itself. So the internal functions at these companies is really about connecting, communicating with different functions, working, we call it a matrix. Nobody has authorities over anybody between the functions. Obviously, there's hierarchy and there's decision-making bodies, governance that do have hierarchy over you, but for the most part, it takes a lot of different people with different functions perspective to work together. But how do you make that happen? It's a really difficult thing, and it's something that we never learn. And I also question whether you can learn from a book. You kind of have to just do it through experience and a lot of thinking by yourself. So that's what I found, that even in a function that's a little bit more technical, commercial data analytics, you are still not doing anything technical. You are doing really how do you communicate things to bring people on board, to get the support, to answer the question, how do you interpret things so that it actually has an impact versus not, to drive something to happen. So that's what I did for 2.5 years, and most recently I switched to a different function, which is highly encouraged at Amgen. I think Amgen is especially good at this, but many other companies are, I would say, encourage you to move laterally to different functions to gain a lot of experience, because if you want to progress your career and move up basically into leadership positions, these days you cannot, there's no straight line up. You always, because leadership positions always have a much broader scope than your individual contributor role. So you have to have gained like all the basic, most of the relevant experiences before you can then go to the next level. So kind of what I did also was trying to explore, what I want to do next and next and next. So moved into this new function called commercial. Actually, I think I skipped this bit. Okay, so we can go to the next one. Yeah, moved into the global value and access, integrated access strategy role. And then I think this role might be even more nebulous to you, because it's like, what does it mean? It's a very behind the scene function. Usually do not hear about this. If somebody working in this at a pharma company, but it's extremely important. Why is that? All of the drugs that Amgen makes, and most of the companies that focus on innovative drug make are called specialty drugs in the US, which basically just means that they are very expensive and they treat the most severe, high unmet need conditions, and they contain a lot of innovation, so they take a lot of time and money and risks to develop. So it's sort of a high value, high risk kind of thing, product that you're developing. And in order to get the business return, you have to sell it at a price that's really high, and nobody's going to be able to pay for it out of pocket. So you always have to be paid by some kind of payer. US, there's the most people have commercial insurance, but there's also Medicare, Medicaid. But in Europe, it's mostly single payer by the government, but there's supplemental. And then in the rest of the world, every single country has their own system and their own rules, and their payers care about different things. So when you go and launch a drug, when you go and try to convince those payers to pay for this drug at this amount, you have to use slightly different kinds of evidence to convince them. And how do you get those evidence? You have to collect it yourself, and that takes a really long time. So developing a drug takes, more than 10 years generally. In the specialty therapy realm, I guess. So at the very, very, very beginning, there are fundamental decisions that need to be made. Even like what indication to go in first, will go in second, because the indication sequencing will have an impact. And what kind of trials do you design? What kind of population do you include? What kind of label do you then aim for? And then all the non-trial evidence that you collect in the real world and mechanistic study, all kinds of things have to factor in many different considerations. And one of them is the access considerations. Eventually you want to set yourself for success to have enough evidence for you to get your drug basically reimbursed so that patients can actually use it, right? Because if it doesn't get reimbursed, nobody gets to use it, then it's a bad business, but also ultimately it's really bad for patients because that is very important life-saving therapy cannot benefit people. So that's what I do now. It's not an analytic decision anymore. So for the and actually I support early pipeline. That's what I'm saying. The drug that it's gonna, well, we don't know whether it's a drug or not. The asset's gonna potentially launch in 10 plus, 15 plus years. At the very beginning, the decision that's to be made needs to factor in that access, and then that's the space that I'm working in. So a lot closer in a sense to science and clinical development, and that's actually really great, closer to my heart, but also bringing the experience from down, like underground commercial experience in the US when I was supporting the launch product. So that's where I am now, and what am I gonna do next? I don't know. So this is a question that I am thinking about right now. You can ask me questions, but I think I'm gonna stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the overview of your entire career journey. We'll open it up to questions, and I'll be happy to start if anyone has a.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. So in sharing your chronological path to where you are today, it sounds like, aside from the fact that it's very nonlinear, which is in fact the norm, it sounds like it sounds like from what you're saying, the hardest part is actually getting a foot into the industry. Once you're there, to infinity and beyond, so to speak, based on your own personal ambitions, your networking, and all, things you can acquire once you've gotten in, right? But it sounds like you're saying that the biggest emphasis on what helped you to successfully matriculate in the first place was less about the technical skills you acquired as a doctoral student and more on the soft interpersonal skills that seem to be more invaluable. Is that the gist of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think you summarize it perfectly.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about because, like, me personally, like, I spent all day learning these technical things, right? But then there is the opportunities for scientific communication and, work in networking and all that. But it seems like even if you apply for an R&D position, you have like, a couple of first authors, a couple of second author papers, it sounds to me like, because you focus more on the non-R&D roles.
Yeah.
So it's like, it makes me wonder, like, if you're looking at an R&D position versus a non-R&D position, how much emphasis they put on your research accomplishments as a doctoral student or postdoctoral student.
Right. So I've never worked in our R&D organization. I can only speak from, knowing other people at Amgen and other companies. That if you want to go into R&D, your research definitely matters. It matters a great deal. The level of research in industry is actually really high. I would say not just applied to mostly drug discovery types of work, but there's also a lot of mechanistic studies, basic science research. There are industry postdoc positions which are much more academic than industry, I would say. And the project they get are not about developing a drug specifically, but much more on the basic research side, which will still support certain things, the understanding of certain things, but not directly. In that sense, I think your very specific subject matter of your research matters a lot, and it has to be a perfect match to what they're looking for, and it's very difficult to know what they're really looking for. So that's where that networking comes in again, because if you look at job descriptions from industry, which is terrible, which I do not endorse, but they're extremely vague. It's written intentionally so that you have no idea what they're looking for like HR reasons, legal reasons, and also, I don't know, it's just kind of is, which is really bad. So in order for you to really know who they're really looking for, what they're really looking for, you have to talk to them. You have to find ways to talk to the people on the team and the hiring managers. So do a lot of LinkedIn digging and try to poke at people. And not everybody's gonna respond, but some of them will. So that's kind of an essential stuff. Yes.
Sorry, were you done?
I can't.
Ask a like totally different question, but
Are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
so my question is, you were saying in the earlier parts of your talk that you really fell in love with biology, initially astronomy, but then biology. And you went on to do your PhD in neuroscience at Purdue. My question is kind of like what geared you away from research, aside from maybe like the obvious of, there's more money and all this other stuff that you're doing. I guess like what in your core maybe changed, or what did you become aware of that made you more interested in the commercial side, and made you okay with like leaving the research and being so close to the biology?
Yes. I think that's one of the questions. I was thinking about it on the drive here. I think there are two sides. One side is really a big reason is watching my PI, from the practical standpoint. Watching my PI, and he actually had a really good pedigree, actually his postdoc advisor is a Nobel Prize laureate, and he's got, he has much better pedigree than I did, and he still struggles so much in just getting an appointment. His first, assistant professor appointment was in his 40s. Like, do I want to spend 10 years doing postdoc? And once you get assistant professor, building lab, it's so difficult. Like, I don't know whether that's like the life that I'm striving for. Also, a very important thing is a lot of people want to do academic research because of the freedom of, freedom of thinking and freedom of inquiry. But is that real though? Like, I realize that you are basically at the mercy of your funding agency. Whatever hot topic is of the day, you get fund, like you try to cling on to it and you get funded. If you don't, like, you don't really get to study what you want to study. So if that, and that is the biggest and probably only draw for academic research. If that's not real, then what is there? Like, why? So I think that's a big reason to push me away from it. I think the small thing was also, I think, mixed in from maybe I felt a little bit insecure about, I don't even think I was that good, but also that I think it was in the second or third year, I started really thinking about whether this is what I want to do. And at the time, I didn't feel like I have the brilliant, original ideas, research ideas to generate for myself and for me to sustain a research career. Honestly, I feel like now I might have more. I think that was the time, only third year, you still are pretty early and you haven't accumulated enough, I think, at the time for me to really think about something original. So I also was not quite sure that I could do it. Yeah, so I think.
So why not a research career in industry? Like what drove you away from that?
I think that's kind of if I can't do this, might as well just go all the way to the other end kind of thing. Also, bench research, I was also a little bit of practicality. I was an electrophysiologist. I was doing single cell patch farm for 5 years. And it's extraordinarily difficult, highly sought after. If I want to do a postdoc, I could do a very good postdoc, but then not very applicable in the industry. So I probably couldn't really find a job, because if you do want to go into bench research, it has to be a perfect match again to your research, and it just doesn't really exist.
On that note, we do have a chat question of, do you ever feel like you miss doing bench research or managing?
Do I
laboratory?
miss doing bench? Not really, I think. No, I really enjoyed it. I was really good at it. Patch cam, which, not a lot of people know how to do it. I was doing actually extra vivo brain slices, so not even cultured cell, their mouse brain cell slices, very difficult. I was very good, I was very proud of myself. Enjoyed it in a meditative way, but I think that was enough. 5 years of doing that was enough. So I've done it, and I enjoyed it, and I think that was enough.
Nice, thank you. And I think we had a question, the great tea, Grace, yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming.
Mhm.
It's very inspirational, gives me hope to hear. So I actually have a question about senior students similar in like my position, and then maybe some that are similar to your position back then. So if you know specifically that you want to switch to more commercial role or medical communications or medical affairs, I've seen a lot of internships out there. I've even seen evidence generation internships, like for example at Ionis. But again, most of them are from bigger companies and maybe, not really startups, right? But slightly on the bigger end. But on startups or like CROs, they don't really offer those type of internships from what I've seen, or else I've missed it. So I'm just wondering, what would you suggest, again, as like someone that didn't do an internship before? Should I be looking for only like startup positions, consulting positions, or what would be the best way to market this?
Right. Startup meaning like biotech kind of startup, like drug discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, versus you mentioned CRO, consulting and bigger pharma, like, Novartis, Pfizer. So I would say, don't go to startups, period, as a first step, as a young professional. If you have to, right, like, if you're set in going into industry, then I would say don't do a postdoc. It's not going to help you. Like if you're set into doing non-research industry positions, then just do not do a postdoc by all means, because it will actually, to some extent, hurt you, because you end up becoming a bit overqualified and people actually question, why did you do that? So it's like you didn't make a sort of choice that makes sense. But if you can, don't go to a startup as your first step. I think that's a very simple advice, because startups, my husband works at a startup right now, super hectic, very exciting, moves super fast. But the thing is, the company is usually super small, 10, 20, 50, 10, even 100 people. So each individual person has a much bigger influence at the company. And usually when you have so small group of people, there are a few people who are super disruptive, and it gets the whole thing. The whole dynamic is completely different, extremely chaotic. And it's just not a good environment for you to learn how industry should work, how it's supposed to be. And when you know nothing, it's very difficult to get your sense. And then another thing is, if you start very first job in a startup, then it's very difficult to get out of that kind of circle to come to a big firm, if you ever want to, right? But the other way is much, much, much easier to go from, and it's highly, highly valued. Usually startups recruit only almost experienced people from big companies, because then they bring their experience to startups. So that's a very simple suggestion. Internships, yes, if your PI supports, then definitely do it. My PI definitely did not, so I missed that. But if you could, definitely try to do it. Big companies, I think it's a very good idea. It's much more bureaucratic, much slower, but you do get to see how things are supposed to be done, like what's the proper way of doing things. And it's also, in a way, less stressful, because everything is at a certain pace, and they account for you are an intern, like this is the expectation. It's much more reasonable, so I would say.
In the back. Yeah, turquoise, yeah.
Okay, I was wondering, I had a question about your first job search. You mentioned that you would apply to like a bunch of roles at Amgen. Looking back, like, would you kind of change that strategy? Or if you do see like multiple roles at a company that you're really interested in, like, is it odd to apply for multiple roles? Or are they like, oh, she's unfocused? Or
Oh,
do you think it's okay to apply for multiple?
yeah, there's nothing wrong with applying for multiple. It will not show up as you're not focused. It's very, very well accepted, so totally fine. I probably didn't apply to the most appropriate position at the time, but you know, I didn't know. So I would say it's not helping, but it also didn't hurt. The important thing was through that job search applications, you got to meet some of the hiring manager who are nice enough to talk to you, and that's the most valuable.
Think in the back.
I have two questions.
Okay.
So one is about your consulting job.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm also looking for some consulting companies like Exponent and MEA, but these are for like, they're gonna go to the court and win the competition, basically just like this, and they're gonna argue with other engineers. So, but I think your consulting career is not like this kind of style. So, do you think it's hard to steer the wheels to your direction from the more like I guess research direction?
Yeah, consulting is such a terrible term because so there's so many different things that you can consult for. There are many technical consulting. That's not what I did. So what I did was general business strategy consulting.
Yes.
And DS is a company that focus more on life sciences. There are other companies like the big names, McKinsey, BCG, that basically consult for all different industries, and they will have their internal life science healthcare division. Either way, I think these are still considered general business strategy consulting, and that's the kind of consulting that gives you a pretty good general kind of basically an MBA that gets paid kind of experience. Versus say there's in my industry, there's healthcare economics consulting, or there's clinical trials, the CROs to some extent, but they're also sort of trial consulting. They're much more technical and depends on your background. You may or may not actually be able to do those kind of things. And they're very different in nature. Sometimes they do exist within the same company, like at CS, they do have the very technical side of, or even like the information technology side of consulting, and machine learning. They are data scientists that have deep expertise. But then at the same time, you have the generalist business strategy consultants as well. In those cases, internal movement usually is very easy, at least in my experience at CS. So you can jump to completely different teams based on your interest, because they would much rather you stay than you within and change the division than leave. At least at my time, I think when they're trying to get rid of people, it might be different. But yeah, so that's one way. So it kind of depends, like he said, the first step out of PhD is the hardest. So, and you know, ideally you want to go to that, you know, perfect first step to set you up, but it may not always happen. So you can have some compromise, and maybe it's easier for you to find another position. Even like say, you don't want to stay in bench research, but it's easier to get into a bench research position or industry postdoc at a company because say your lab has connection with the company or whatever. That's better than not. And then moving within a company is generally not terribly difficult. Another thing is, once you're in the company, you know, you have the company account, you have the email address, you can network so much easier than cold calling people. So, and then you get to learn about other people's work from the inside, and it just makes it easier.
Okay, so my second.
Could we answer another person's and then come back, just because time's sake?
Sure.
I think we had a question in the middle, yeah.
Hi, I had a question about like career trajectory. In my view, at some point in R&D, when you climb up the ladder, I feel like the decisions become less technical and more like a business. Go, no go, do you feel like because of your business and commercial perspective, you can at some point switch to like those higher roles and in R&D?
Not higher, but it is actually one direction that I'm considering for like what to do next, potentially. There are also many positions in research, discovery research, that are not strictly about the bench research. There's a lot of research strategy involved. And then I think Amgen doesn't have that specific title, but some other companies do. They have sort of a pipeline research strategy kind of function that sits within R&D, but then you basically bring in the business perspective. It's organized differently in different companies. Like to some extent, what I do right now is that. So I work from preclinical asset to phase 2. So preclinical would be as early as early optimization. So you don't even have a molecule yet. You're still going through the chemistry and the biology, the toxicology panels, in vitro. So you're still deciding what your molecule is at that stage. Most of the team is driven by research, but commercial comes in and provides our, early perspectives. So yeah, and I very much enjoy that. So I know with my background, potentially that could be a direction. It wouldn't necessarily be a higher up. It's just another, part of the matrix. But it's also true that in R&D, even going up, it becomes more and more about the strategy and managing. It's like your PI is not going to really do wet lab, right? So it's like that.
I think, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on your work-life balance right now in your position. And if you've seen any other directions that people have taken to get to where you're at rather than the consulting transition. Has there been any other stepping stones you've seen people use?
Okay. My work life right now is great. It's really probably the best I've ever had in my life, to be honest. But also, when you're young, you can work very hard, but at some point you have to live like an adult. But that's partially how I feel about, consulting. It's generally a very young industry and people really work hard, party hard. I don't love it. So the corporate life, it's much more reasonable and slow, but not that slow, but I would have to say it's much more structured than the hectic consulting life. So it's great. Other paths to come to my position, to be honest, so my current role in global value and access, my past is very, very atypical. So I actually don't think a lot of people have this kind of path. Because value and access is to some extent quite specific about understanding the payer system or health economics. So a lot of people are health economists, like PhDs, but in health economics, which is a very specific discipline. And they would have done health economics research in the industry consulting or at the company and then going to the strategy side. Or people coming from, say, US payer value and access, and usually they will come from the payer side, say CVS and like Optum. They will have worked on the ground, know how that works, come to the pharma side, and then from the US to global. My background is quite unusual. I actually don't have a lot of subject matter expertise. So that speaks to also your specific manager. So right now, my manager is super, super supportive, and she sees that I can learn certain skills, but then I also bring a different set of skills that's valuable for the team. Not every manager is so open-minded, and you cannot plan for it. Therefore, I also don't have a plan, but this, position comes up and I tried it and I got it, so I went with it. So that's kind of the situation. In terms of just in general PhD to pharma, I think consulting is actually the mainstream or easier path or more natural path. I have friends who went into like venture capital firm from like research associate kind of level, and then went into pharma. I actually think it's harder to get into a venture capital firm than to consulting. But yeah, I guess that's.
We'll go back to that one last question. I think we'll have to wrap that up afterwards. Do you wanna,
Oh.
your other question? Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm the question, okay.
No, I thought you had,
Yeah,
the second question,
I have another one, yes. It's just like a follow-up for the previous one. So, I think you introduced your, like the whole career journey pretty well. So do you think the experience in your PhD is not like the technical experience, it's the organization experience, helped to get the first consulting job?
Yeah, definitely. I think the two things really helped on the surface, and then another thing really helped in reality. So on the surface, the scientific illustration. So like when I was doing my PhD, one thing is my PI really likes to have like first illustrations about what you were doing. So drawing cartoons essentially in Illustrator, which really helped, even though we don't use Illustrator, but you use PowerPoint, which is just a simpler way. But it's about being able to visualize a very complex concept in something that everybody can understand and not mistaken. That was really helpful because all day long, what you do essentially in consulting and to some extent right now is making PowerPoint slides. And that sounds super boring, but I actually really enjoy it. I love it. And I'm generally good at it, I would consider myself, because of that ability to visualize things, like visualize a concept in a way. So you first have to understand the concept and then to visualize it. I think a lot of people in science actually are very good at it. And I think that part of training is definitely super helpful. And also how do you communicate a complex concept to people, so when you're giving talks and stuff like that. And then I think the part that really helped in reality that doesn't really come up in interview easily, but it is very important, is the ability to kind of, how do you say that, grasp the essence of one piece of work when you don't have a lot of background or knowledge about it, and then being able to, in a way, criticize it. So think like when you're going to different talks on topics that you are not familiar with. I was always known as a student who asked a really difficult question. So other students are afraid of me going to their talks because then I ask really difficult questions for them. I would obviously ask questions or bring up my point in a very different way, in a much more action-oriented in business, because there's no point of asking a question if you don't have a solution for it. It's about building up something. And back then it was more criticism for the sake of criticism, which was one of my biggest gripe about academia. But regardless, the thinking behind is, using your logic, like I don't really know this subject, but based on this piece of talk or this paper or something, you can really quickly assess and criticize that. That's really important because in consulting, every project is completely new. You don't actually know anything, but you have to make sense of it. And that's really the value that you're adding.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Let's thank her for.
Thank you for inviting me, and thanks so much to Lauren. And I think I can actually stay around for a little longer, so.
That'd be wonderful.
If anyone wants to keep chatting. And I think there's a lot more food.
And thank you guys so much for coming out. We'll definitely be hosting future events. I hope to see you guys again.
Sorry. Stop the recording. Hi.
I actually have to do